Hi, welcome. This is week 6, and we'll be talking about chapters 13 and 14, counseling Native American families of Native American descent and also of European descent. So, in chapter 13, um, we book talks about how Native Americans are represented today. They are a group of people with a steadily growing population with more than 5.2 million, or just more than 1% of the US population. More than 566 are federally recognized tribes, 228 of which exist in Alaska. More than 50 states recognize the tribes, 324 federally recognized Native American reservations. The largest tribes today in the U.S. are the Navajo, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Siku, the Chippewa, the Apache, the Blackfeet, the Iroquois, and the Pueblo. So Native American youth currently represent about the largest portion of the overall Native American population. The median age for Native Americans is 31 years compared to the median age of 37 for the overall US population. Many Native Americans grow up in communities characterized by high rates of unemployment, poverty, physical and mental health disparities, violence, and lower levels of educational achievement in comparison to the US population totals. The Native American communities across the United States and Canada are seeking to transcend experiences of trauma and loss by embracing these cultural practices. The group membership, the term Native American is often used to describe indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere whose life and life ways are intricately interwoven with the natural environment. The U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs in 2015 defined Native Americans as someone who had blood degree from and is recognized as such by federally recognized tribes or villages as an enrolled tribal member or the U.S. Other factors include the person's knowledge of his or her tribe's culture, history, language, religion, familia, kinships, and how strongly a person identifies himself or herself as the American Indian or Alaskan Native. Blood quantum becomes one of the definitions, and it is the degree of Indian blood or certification of Indian blood, the CIB card. It refers to the percentage of ancestry that can be traced to the people from a specific tribe or nation. The minimum blood quantum for membership varies among the different tribes and nations. Issues of blood quantum poses numerous challenges in the form of health identities for Native American people. The U.S. Census Bureau relies on the self-identification to determine who is a Native American person. And some of the terms used historically or currently um, to refer to Native people are American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native people, Indian, First American, Amerindian, American, First Nations people, Aboriginal people, and Indigenous people. A little history of the Native Americans. They were characterized by institutional racism and discrimination. The dominant culture has a long history of opposition to the Native culture and attempts to assimilate Native people, all of which has had a long lasting effects on the culture and Native people's way of life. There are 5 stages in the US government policy leading to the current stage of tribal sovereignty experienced by the native tribes. The first was the removal period that took place from the 1600s to the 1840s. The second was the reservational period, which was from the 1860s to the 1920s. The third was the reorganization period, from the 1930s to the 1950s. And then the third was the termination period from the 1950s to the 1960s. And then the fifth was the self-determination period from 1975 to the present. Efforts by the U.S. to destroy or assimilate Native American peoples in this country are abundant. And by the end of the 18th century, the Native American population had been reduced to 10% of its original size. Policies of extermination and seizure of lands were very common. In 1838, President Andrew Jackson signed off on an act that forced the removal of over 16,000 Cherokees and members of the other tribes. That was called the Trail of Tears. The Native American children were taken from their homes and forced to attend boarding schools. With the Citizenship Act of the 1924, the U.S. government finally recognized the citizenship of Native Americans. The American Native Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978 granted Native Americans religious freedom. They have a historical trauma that describes the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from mass groups of trauma experiences. The historical trauma response is the constellation of the features in reaction to this trauma that might include substance abuse, suicidal thoughts and gestures, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, anger, and difficulty recognizing and expressing emotion. Across the Native American populations in the United States and throughout the world, boarding schools were consistently an element of the policy of forced assimilation through removal from a disintegration of traditional culture. The transgenerational effects of the residential school included disruption of the families and the communities, confusion of parenting with punitive institutional practices, impaired emotional response, repetition of physical and sexual abuse, loss of knowledge, language, and traditions, and systematic devaluing of Native American identity. Some current social, economic, and political issues. The American policies of assimilation have had a pervasive impact on the Native American people and their ways of life, including families, educational attainment, income and poverty, employment, and other risk factors. The Native American families are intergenerational with non-blood kinships and cultural adoptions. More than half of the Native American grandparents are responsible for grandchildren for longer than a 5-year period of time. Native Americans have 70% higher school graduation rates and are reportedly earning bachelor degrees at a rate of 11%, which is well below the national average. Native youth have the highest dropout rate in the nation with 29.1% compared to that of 9% for the total of the US population. Native Americans have reported poverty levels of 30% compared to the 16% of total US populations. The average unemployment rate for Native American people is 45%. And on some reservations, the unemployment rate is as high as 90%. Some other risk factors that Native Americans face: arrests, alcoholism, and alcohol mortality, fetal alcohol syndrome, suicide, tuberculosis, and diabetes. There are also social and political issues that create both challenges and opportunities for Native American people, which include self-determination and sovereignty, federal and state recognition, cultural preservation, the achievement gap, gaming, tribal resources, sacred sites, and mascot issues. Diving into self-determination and sovereignty, the federally recognized tribal governments possess the right to form their own government, enforce laws, tax members, establish requirements for membership, license and regulate activities, zone areas, and exclude persons from tribal territories. This limitation to tribal powers are the same as those applicable to the state. This sovereignty exists as a result of the Indian Self-Determination and Educational Assistance Act that was passed in 1975. Advocates point out that if the tribes were truly respected as a sovereign nation, the U.S. Secretary of State, rather than the Bureau of Indian Affairs, would handle matters related to relations with Native Americans. Regardless of the issues of the indigenous rights on the international stage, the UN General Assembly adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007. This set the standards toward eliminating human right violation and protecting rights. The purpose of this declaration is to set out the individuals and collective rights of Indigenous people, as well as their rights to culture, identity, language, employment, health education, and other issues. The federal and state recognition of American Indians and Alaskan Natives is based on historical and government relationships involving treaties and contracts that are made in the past with certain tribes. Some tribal nations have been able to establish their heritage and obtain federal recognition, and a number of tribes are recognized by individual states, but not by the federal government. The state recognition is based on tribal organizations located within specific state boundaries, which is based on historical and mutual relationships established by the state legislator or the executive actions by the state governors. Cultural preservation. Efforts are being made to preserve culture by developing programs both inside and outside of school to teach Native American youth traditions, arts, and crafts, the language, ceremonies, and prayers, songs and chants, and their dance. There have been a positive advances in cultural preservation since the passage of the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968, the Indian Educational Act of 1972, and the Indian Religious Freedoms Act of 1978. Native American communities across the United States and Canada are seeking to transcend experiences of trauma and loss by embracing cultural practices informed by evidence. There are three general efforts in Native communities around intervention that focus on community engagement and cultural preservation, which include the American Indian and Alaskan Native Head Start Research Center, the Circles of Care Initiative, and the American Indian Life Skills Development Curriculum. When talking about the achievement gap, the education assimilation policies provided to be destructive to the Native American children. The goal, purpose, values, and behavioral expectations and sequence of learning process in a traditional Native American approach to education and socialization differed completely from and are in direct conflict with the mainstream US educational approach. The discontinuity of among cultural values seems to have its great impact around the fourth grade, with a steady decline in academic performance. The majority of the Native American students drop out of school around the 10th grade. So the achievement gap begins early in the Native American student's academic career and broadens with over time. The Native American students perform at least 2 grade levels below their white peers in reading and in math. Studies suggest that the Native American students often enter school unprepared to learn. Native American students are 237% more likely to drop out and 207% more likely to be expelled than white students. As a result of testing accountability legislation, public schools across the nation appear to have abandoned any efforts to include the culture, language, and traditions of Native students that they are serving. With little to no consultation with tribes, Native communities, and parents of Native children, resources have focused solely on increasing test scores in the core curriculum areas. The traditional values, orientations of Native American students remain in consistent conflict with the value orientation on which the US system functions. So these students often experience poor academic achievement, poor self-concept, low self-esteem, higher rates of educational attrition, boredom in school, and difficulty with teachers and peer relationships. Common themes outside the classroom that lead to the achievement gap for Native American students include culture and identity, discrimination and institutional oppression, negotiations of duality, and then the tribes are working to improve educational experiences for Native American students by incorporating culturally based learning. Some examples of that is language immersion, tribal cultural arts and crafts, and storytelling, and mentoring by their elders. The gaming industry has become a major source of income and economic development for many Native American nations, as well as controversy and scandal for some. The challenge for many of the tribes is how to maintain positive revenue streams and to plan for a future so that the growth continues in a positive way. There are 400 Native American gaming establishments um, that are operated by approximately 220 federally recognized tribes with revenues of 18.5 billion. 12% of the Indian gaming establishments generate 65% of Indian gaming revenues. The vast majority of tribal casinos are much less financially successful, particularly those in the Midwest and the Great Plains. Some resources for the tribes. Federally recognized reservations total approximately 55 million acres. However, 11 million acres within the reservation boundaries are owned by non-Indians. The land base provides many native nations with an array of resources from which to benefit the people, and also with a number of challenges about how to maintain, protect, or expand that land base. Despite some of the gains, such as the government settlement payments, many tribes are locked in heated legal battles with the government and private interests to maintain and protect treaty-based rights to their homelands and sacred sites. Some sacred sites and reparations and reburial. The Native people have sacred places in which they pray, fast, seek vision, conduct ceremonies, receive guidance from spiritual guides, and teach youth the traditional ways. Many physical conditions such as spraying and lodging of trees, dams, fences, building roads, mining, hydroelectric plants, urban housing, tourism, and vandalism inextricably affect the sacred sites. Many of the sacred sites are under the control of the federal agencies. Many ancient graves of the Native people have been disturbed or destroyed, and the desecration and looting of the Native grave reached its peak in the 1980s. Native people have have persevered through the passages of critical legislation that now protect Native grave sites from looting and providing Native people with legal means for reclaiming both remains and sacred objects. So the mascot issues. So we've seen this in our um, in education, as many schools are changing the name of their mascot if it was um, disrespectful to the Indian culture. There's been a constant source of controversy between the Native people and non-natives in both the US and Canada, and it has been sports mascots that depicting the Native Americans in a derogatory manner. The sports teams have been challenged to do away with the stereotypical racist images of the Native American people as mascots. In spite of the changes by high-profile sports organizations, some lower-level school sports teams continue to use such images, and they remain under scrutiny by those who maintain those practices and are offensive and perpetuate negative racial stereotypes. So, some of the Native American culture and values. Some common Native traditional values include community contribution, sharing, accepting, cooperation, harmony and balance, non-interference, extended family, attention to nature, immediacy of time, awareness of the relationship, and deep respect for elders. The Native American culture and values, they are honoring connection, refers to the belief that the human being exists on Mother's Earth to help and protect life. There are several basic Native American spiritual and traditional beliefs, such as there's a single higher power known as a creator. Plants and animals are like humans and part of the spiritual world. Human beings are made up of spirit, mind, and body, which are all interconnected. Wellness and harmony in body, mind, and spirit. Natural wellness is caused by the violation of sacred, social, or natural law of creation. Unnatural wellness is caused by conjuring witchcraft from those with destructive intent. And each of us is responsible for our own wellness by keeping ourselves attuned to self, relation, environment, and the universe. There are four basic elements, which include medicine, harmony, relation, and vision. Medicine is the Native concept which implies the very essence of our being, or the life force that exists in all creatures on Mother Earth. Everything is alive. Healing and worship are considered as one and the same. The concept of healing and wellness is not only a physical state, but a spiritual one as well. Harmony means living in a humble way and giving thanks for all the gifts that one receives each and every day, no matter how big or small. Everything has a purpose, and harmony is represented by the numbers 4 and 7. Relation refers to a total way of existing in the world and practicing respect and the interconnection that humans share. All things are connected. General guidelines include never take more than you need, give thanks for what you have or what you receive, take great care to use all of what you do have, and give away what you do not need. Understanding one's vision is understanding the direction of one's path as a caretaker, moving to the rhythm of the sacred heartbeat. Embracing the medicine of every living thing. Ceremonies are used for healing, giving thanks, celebrating, clearing the way, and blessing. For many of the Native American people, the cultural identity is rooted in tribal membership, community, and heritage rather than in personal achievements, social or financial status, or acquired possessions. The extended family, at least 3 generations, and the tribal group take precedence over all other affiliations. The tribe is an interdependent system of people who perceive themselves to be part of the greater whole rather than being a whole consisting of individual parts. Traditional Native people judge themselves and their actions according to whether or not they're benefiting the tribal community and its continued harmonious function. Family may or may not consist of blood relatives. It's common to practice to claim a non-blood relative person as a relative, thereby welcoming him or her as a real family member. It is both an obligation and a pleasure to share in raising and caring for the children in one's family. It's not unusual for a native child to be raised in several different households over time. Native communities honor their elders as the keepers of wisdom for their lifetime's worth of knowledge and experience. And Native American elders pass on to the children the notion that their own life force carries the spirits of their ancestors. Humility is valued. Boasting on one's accomplishments and loud behavior that attracts attention to oneself is discouraged. Dropping one's head and eyes is a sign of respect for an elder or honored person. Generosity is considered the sign of wisdom and humility. And in the Native worldview, everything has its place. It's important to be able to learn through careful observation, listening, and patience, as well as asking questions or thinking through. In the traditional Indian view, humans do not always have to live by the clock. Mother Nature has her own unique rhythms, which signal the beginning and end of other things, and only need to be observed and listened quietly to know when it is time. Native American interactions of style emphasize nonverbal communication over verbal communication. Moderation in speech and avoidance of direct eye contact are signals of respect. Storytelling is often used to express feelings, beliefs, and the importance of experiences. Traditional Native people practice self-discipline through silence, modesty, and patience. Native traditions, the medicine way, emphasizes a unique sense of being that allows one to live in accord with the natural flow of life energy. And it's not just enough to be our purpose in life, is to develop the inner self in relation to everything else around us. The true being requires that individuals know and experience their connection and that they honor their relationship with all their heart. The lessons of the eagle feather. The eagle's feathers are considered to be indefinitely sacred and are used for a variety of purposes such as ceremonies, healings, and purifications. The eagle medicine represents a state of being achieved through diligence, understanding, awareness, and completion of testing of initiation, such as the vision quest or other demanding life experiences. Highly respected elder status is associated with eagle medicine, and the eagle feather represents duality in existence. So when we're starting to counsel Native American clients, counselors should attend to two early assessment factors: the extent to which acculturation has affected the client's cultural identity, and the influence of oppression on the client's experience and current presenting issues. The first step in counseling relationships and a sign of respect lies in the counselor finding out from which tribe the client comes and possibly whether that person is directly affiliated with that tribe, federal, state, or community recognition. Through both verbal and nonverbal cues, it's important to get a sense of the client's level of acculturation. And then the counselor needs to assess the client's values, geographic origins, tribal affiliations, family history, and structure. So some other guidelines, major underlying and ongoing issues in counseling most Native American clients is trust versus mistrust, as it is with many oppressed people. Both prevention and treatment need to focus on eliminating the historical trauma response and fostering a reattachment to the traditional Native values. The historical trauma and unresolved grief intervention. It will address risk and protective factors for substance abuse through group trauma and psychoeducational interventions that seek to restore attachment to traditional values. And by educating themselves about the history of the tribe from which the Native client comes and the cutting edge treatments, modalities, such as the HTUG, the counselors can better understand the impacts of the institutional racism and acculturation. They need to explore cultural conflicts itself. It's an important goal for counseling. Counselors need to recognize the vast diversity of spiritual traditions and customs that can be tribally specific. They need to understand the rule of opposites. It is essential for working with Native American clients who may be experiencing dissonance in their life. And it's important to help the Native clients discover their purpose, examining their assumptions, seeking an awareness of universal and personal truths, and making choices to achieve harmony and balance. Some recommendations regarding communication styles: greet clients with a gentle handshake, words of greeting or head nodding. Show hospitality by offering a beverage or a snack as a sign of good relations. Use silence or quiet time at the beginning of a session as an appropriate way of transitioning into the therapeutic process. Respects physical space by not sitting too close or directly across from the client. Match the client's level of eye contact to show respect and understanding. Intention is important in fostering a true relationship. Counselors can focus on honoring the mental space between counselor and client by offering respect and humility in the counseling process. And honor choice and collaboration, offer suggestions without offering directions. Humor is an important Native coping mechanism and can be a powerful therapeutic technique. It should only be used if the client invites it, meaning that the client trusts the counselor enough to connect on that level. And they should exercise caution and be sensitive to using humor in a way that does not reinforce various means of oppression that the client has endured. It is important to foster cultural connections. Participants in community programs, cultural activities, and volunteering programs. Encourage physical health. Encourage the client to get regular physical checkups, blood tests, etc., as a preventative measure. Examine and teach historical content, the psychoeducational experience, or dialogues about Native American experience in the U.S. to help the clients explore their own level of cultural identity development. Practice tribal specific interventions, promote positive cultural identity, reduce isolation, enhance social connections, reduce general splits. The clients of all ages can benefit from acting or learning from elders, serving as role models and teachers for young people. Enhance coping mechanisms, consult with the medicine person to help the clients, and work with the non-interference principle, addressing avoidance behavior of clients to the extent that it may be destructive. Working from a social justice and advocacy counseling perspective, the counselor needs to focus on three main levels of practice from advocacy. and social justice counseling perspective. The client and the student advocacy direct counseling strategies based on understanding the social, political, economic, and cultural context in which the client lives, facilitating self-advocacy on the part of the client, school and community advocacy, assisting the community organizations that are working for change and maintaining a direction for that change that will affect macro levels of access and resources, the public arena advocacy, disseminating information widely to raise social consciousness, and writing articles on pertinent issues. Okay, that pretty much covers chapter 13. I'm going to move into chapter 14. Chapter 14 was individuals and families of European descent. And one of the most significant developments of European history was the creation of the idea that Europe existed as a distinct region. The Roman Empire helped to create the infrastructure for stabilizing living environments through the areas now defined as Europe. After the fall of the empire, this region consistently made of nomadic tribes, the Anglos, the Celtics, the Gaul, the Saxon, the slaves, and had vague boundaries. The physical feature and cultural practices were important in the self-determination of who was and who was not European. And this pattern of categorizing themselves and others continued throughout history. An important social cultural factor was the adoption of the Christian religion. The Christian/Islamic border was merely one of a physical territory, but became an important social distinction as well. Laws were passed in Europe to maintain strict Christian bloodlines, and active participants in the Latin Christian culture and obedience to the Pope were essential criteria for being European. During the early colonial periods, the late 15th century, there was an influx of settlers in North America. Most early European immigrants came for economic reasons, and some came for religious freedom. It was a time of extreme religious intolerance. The very power dynamics that were that the people were escaping, oppression, class structure, quickly began to appear within the colonies themselves. So the early settlers were very diverse and included colonists from England, Scotland, Germany, France, and Africa, as well as Jews and Christians. The English had a social and political dominance of colonies, and the European ethnic groups intermarried with English culture and values, remaining dominant. Individuals of other ethnic backgrounds assimilated to the English/American culture. So during the early colonial period, depending on the year and the ethnic group, they settled in various areas and for a primary reason. So we had the Anglos, Germans, and Poles. They were in Jamestown, Virginia, for financial opportunities. The Dutch in the New Netherlands, Manhattan Island, for financial reasons. The Swedes, Delaware Bay, for fur and tobacco trading. The Quakers, which were the Anglos and the Germans in Philadelphia and Germantown, Pennsylvania, for the holy experiment for people to live in peace. And the French, the Mississippi River, New Orleans to St. Louis to Detroit for farming and plantation. So that was the European, the immigration began in the 1600s and continues till today. Between the 1820s and 1998, approximately 61% of the over 64 million legal immigrants to the United States came from Europe. The European immigrant children and families represented diverse and intercultural groups. There were arbitrary hierarchies that distinguished old immigrants from new ones, or more specifically, that distinguished the ethnic group of the Northern and the Western Europe from those of the Southern and Eastern European countries that have been placed throughout much of the US history. This discrimination was particularly prevalent during the period mass migration from the certain European countries. So the major European immigration periods were 1845 to the 1900s, and it talked about the different cultures, the reason for the immigration, and the areas in which they settled. So the terminology, the term white is used to describe the larger racial group. Caucasian is mostly commonly used to describe this group, although Caucasian is actually the ethnic group of the people traditionally from the isthmus between the Black and the Caspian Seas. The European Americans were generally referred to as individuals living in the US who were recent immigrants from or identify closely with the European heritage in terms of values, traditions, and worldviews. And then the white American ethnic, which describes the individuals of European descent who ethnically identify themselves as Americans and who have adopted the culture, traditions, and values of the dominant culture in the United States. The philosophical base was the English system that dominated the social and political systems, and their ethnicity also contributed. The pioneer spirit and the manifest destiny demonstrated how cultural and religious beliefs interacted. And there were 3 specific contributions to the development of the white American ethnicity, which included the American melting pot, the American dream, and the creation of national heritage. The melting pot term was used as a metaphor to describe the process of combining a variety of cultural backgrounds and beliefs to create a new virtuous one, which was white America. The idea was that it was okay to be different as long as one accepts the mainstream, and no Europeans were largely excluded from adding their contributions or flavors to the cultural pot, leading to both marginalization and discrimination against non-white or non-English speaking Americans. With the civil rights movement, the melting pot idea was replaced with a new one. It was other metaphors which focused on a sense of multiculturalism, inclusion, and ethnic pride. And some metaphors have been the salad bowl or the quilt. The American dream, it reinforces the notion of US as a utopia. It explained the country's political and social structure. It incorporated the nation's state ideal of liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. It provided an explanation of the success of Americans as well as justifications for other families and groups' financial struggles. Mediocrity described as a belief that, meritocracy described as a belief that individual success is based on the person's skill, ability, and work ethic rather than on external force. So as a rise in nationalism occurred in the early 1900s, the US Department of Defense began funding the preservation of war monuments, which began the process of creating a collective memory and began the national heritage. The US educational system provided a vital line in promoting the national heritage and a collective memory created by the dominant culture. American students learned and decided that Eurocentric and white American ethnic perspectives of the brief history of the US. The school system served as a shape to reform the students from diverse backgrounds into being acceptable participants in the idealization version of the US that was put forth in the curriculum. So the white members of American society were given significant social and economic advantages to defy the meritocracy that is supposed to exist in the US. So the ethnocentric monoculturalism instilled in members of the dominant group a belief in superiority of values and practices that the group of that group, without making the individuals aware that their beliefs are culturally biased. Factors that facilitated the indivisibility of systemic oppression included the belief in meritocracy, religious and virtuous rationalization for civilizing communities deemed godless or uncivil, common teaching that racism occurred through individual acts of meanness, and the challenge for white Americans became honoring their traditions, beliefs, customs, and values without imposing them on others or using them as a yardstick by which all other cultures and peoples were judged. So every white family was an immigrant family at some point. Transitions from European ethnic to white American ethnic is dependent on the individual or family being defined as racially white. There were prerequisites for being included in this category and having been dramatically altered over the years. The most exclusive level of societies were contingent on physical characteristics, language and religious beliefs, practices, political affiliations, economic stability, and the willingness to adopt white Protestant cultures. The idea of race as a physical reality began to emerge in the 17th century. Settlers used the idea of Black Africans were a separate race from white Europeans, thereby justifying their enslaving of Africans. The idea of race influenced social interactions, political decisions, scientific inquiry, and theological positions for decades. The parameters for defining who was white became more inclusive over time. Effective assimilation strategies for immigrants included speaking English, adopting an American name, receiving an American education, and marrying into a white family. The dominant culture expanded to include other English-speaking or Western and North European ethnicities such as the German, the French, the Scot, Irish. The world wars in Europe affected the development of white American ethnicity. Genocide based on ethnicity prompted Americans to take a far more accepting view of others. In addition, a new vast middle class was created when soldiers from families who were largely uneducated came home and attended college under the GI Bill. Access to college education and subsequent middle-class wages provided the opportunity for previously excluded groups to enter the white American ethnicity if they chose to. Non-European individuals were rarely able to become fully white, but European immigrants could become white. There was a strong debate over the process of becoming white, and when individuals become white, the privileges associated with being a member of the majority culture followed. The process of becoming white also had its disadvantages. The European Americans had a myriad of intragroup differences and an understanding that these differences were vital to the understanding an individual. Within the group variables, it included European ethnic identity and the degree to which individuals identified with their European heritage, socioeconomic status, educational levels, geographic variables, religious views, generational differences, and non-ethnic marginal group identity, such as the ability status or relationship orientation. So the European ethnicity They had common cultural values and characteristics. So each one, the Anglos, the Dutch Americans, the French Canadians, or the Franco Americans, had different characteristics, as well as the Germans, the Greeks, the Irish Americans, the Italian Americans, the Jewish Americans, the Polish Americans, the Scot Irish Americans, and the Scandinavian Americans. So there are 53 nationalities that have been identified within the larger European American umbrella. European immigration continues in 2003, and immigrants of European descent represent approximately 30% of documented immigrants. Current European immigrant children and families representing a very broad range of diverse and intercultural groups. There are 40% of European immigrants that arrived from Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, 40% from Northern and Western Europe, UK, Germany, and 16% from Southern Europe, Italy, Portugal, and Greece. Immigrants are individuals living in the country other than their native country. Non-citizens of a host country grant legal permission to permanently reside in a new host country. In 2013, over 91,000 European immigrants were granted legal permanent status by the US. Undocumented immigrants refers to non-citizens of host countries who did not go through these procedures established by the host country, and individuals on temporary status who stay beyond the established time, and individuals who enter the host country without going through inspection. The term refugees refers to the people who are living outside their native country and who are granted permission to set up residency in a host country because they are either unable or unwilling to return to their native country for fear of persecution. And the international students are individuals living in the host country for the purpose of pursuing a degree, often an advanced degree. And although international students can apply to stay in the host country to pursue career opportunities post-graduation, most eventually return to their home country. There are immigration stressors. The fact that European immigrants share physical and cultural features with the dominant culture in the US can lead to acculturation issues and pressures that are quite unique to the European immigrant population. Some of those stressors include experiencing process similar to grieving when adjusting to a new country, isolation, shame, disconnected from community, family, and friends, being devalued and silenced, communication difficulties for those non-English speakers. In the US, acculturation is often used to describe the cultural groups adapting to white American ethnic lifestyle, values, and language. Acculturation does not follow a linear model, but it is a complex and cyclical process characterized by repeating interactions with the host culture and the individual's interpretation of those experiences. The ethnic identity reconstruction is an international model which individuals participate in a process of building ideas about one's identity through discourse with others within important social contexts. Some factors include culture of origin, identity attitudes, preferences of lifestyle of immigration populations, political climate, and climate of host culture, country, and the interactions between all of those factors. So since the European immigrants looked white, they may not be viewed as foreigners and may have an easier time assimilating. But many, it was assumed that recent European immigrants, especially those with good English skills, are more acculturated than they were. Because communication plays such an important role in adolescent socialization, children and adolescents are often more motivated to learn English to establish relationships with their peers. So it was important to consider that children might experience rejection and isolation within their own families and community systems when forming unions with individuals from diverse backgrounds. Cultural conflicts also come into play around family structure and gender roles, with recent European immigrants. Like most other U.S. immigrants, immigrants from Europe have faced and continue to face discrimination in a variety of ways arriving in the U.S. Many European groups have negatively stereotyped in mainstream U.S. culture by other groups. Overt discrimination is more likely to exist when immigrants have more visible or dramatic differences from the majority culture. Example, strong accents, ethnic name, physical attributes. European immigrants also face a more subtle but just as damaging systematic oppression. Immigrants who have poor English skills are far more likely to be employed regardless of skill level or education. The mental well-being and pathology are largely Western European constructs. Many early theorists are white males of European or European American descent, and thus their approaches were well developed within their cultural context. Evidence for this can be seen in the individual's focus of many early therapy styles and the focus on individual responsibility and the use of medical model to describe diagnoses, among others. In fact, this disruption of autonomous functioning is a major consideration for diagnosis of just about any mental health issue that's defined in the DSM. The cultural belief in meritocracy can lead to feelings of inferiority and shame over perceived failures, particularly among the working class white men. Scapegoating is a common way of white America ethnic dealing with feelings. The Calvinistic idea that good fortune is evident of righteousness and predestined salvation contributes to the people's confusion over tragedy, such as unfair when bad things happen to good people. With the value placed on independence and individualism, failure to overcome an obstacle is seen as being due to personal weakness. Individuals and families may retreat from help and mask painful feelings with abusive behavior. Inconsistencies with larger cultures, such as denying liberties to others, contribute to stress and frustration for white American ethnics. The focus on individuals can mean that the family good is often sacrificed for the good of the individual within the family. Individuation from the family is widely valued, but the timing of individuation can have profound effects on the future development of the child, such as premature identity foreclosure and enmeshment. Individualism may play a role in marital problems. The value on the youth and characteristics commonly associated with the youth, such as beauty, athleticism, freedom, contribute to the emotional difficulties, particularly with those of older white Americans and those who have disabilities. Cultural norms discourage expression of emotion, especially difficult emotion. Talking about problems with strangers is often seen as a sign of weakness. When counseling white American ethnic clients, culture, particularly European and white American culture, plays a significant role in the traditional theoretical approaches. Humanistic and group approaches may not be as in line with the white American cultural norm. The psychodynamic behaviorist, the cognitive, Adlerian, and reality therapy approaches stresses the importance of European and white American values in healing, in the healing process, such as accepting individual responsibility, committing to hard work, valuing the client's right to privacy, and focusing on objective, measurable goals to indicate success. The feminist and multicultural movements add awareness to the role of the culture that the culture plays in both the presence of issues and in the helping process. So when conceptualizing white American clients from a multicultural perspective, counselors should be aware of their own worldviews that they bring into the session, such as their cultural values and theoretical perspective. They need to understand the major cultural values underlying the white American ethnicity and being able to understand the unique worldviews of the white American client, which may be based in white American values, but also differ in significant ways due to a variety of social geographics, generation, and personal factors and intersecting identities. So, when counseling white American ethnic clients, especially the older Americans, they may not be comfortable discussing their culture and may be unclear about their cultural values. A discussion about cultural values may begin as a more general discussion about beliefs approaching to life, family traditions, and roles. And the counselor can conceptualize the role of that cultural conflicts may play in presenting a problem and/or in an underlying issue. So an intercultural conflict describes values and beliefs within the white American culture framework that are in conflict with one another or conflict with reality of the situation. Conflicts can also arise between cultural beliefs and the client's personal beliefs. In this way, counseling white American clients can be similar to counseling clients of color and other recent immigrants. Establishing a relationship with the white American client is a crucial process of the helping process. Many white Americans, and in particular males, are taught to withhold expression and emotion. White Americans will appreciate autonomy to do the work counseling requires, but may also expect the counselor to provide guidance early in the counseling process and feedback regarding the progress. And conscientious raising, or helping the client to develop insight or a deep awareness, will likely play an important part in the counseling process. A multicultural counselor working with a white American should help to build the client's cultural awareness in several ways, help the client fully understand their own culture and make the values of their culture explicit, help the client better understand power dynamics and their privilege, help the client identify their cultural values, facilitate the process of examining congruency between white American culture values and the values of the individual within the culture. And one of the more powerful gifts that effective conscious raising gives to the client is the ability to choose. Choosing can play a huge role in helping white American clients to live more according to the cultural values of freedom and equality for all people. Cross-cultural counseling is sometimes approached with a trepidation regarding the ability to establish therapeutic relationships, but the reality may be that cross-cultural relationships may be particularly therapeutic because they are cross-cultural. It's important for counselors of color to fully develop the therapeutic relationship with their clients and to use this relationship to further develop therapeutic insight. Counselors of color have a great opportunity to model an appropriate process for cross-cultural understanding and respect for different cultural values and practices. Some mental health issues of the European immigrants and refugees and international students. Some common stressors are the pre-migration stressors, which whatever challenges led to the decision to relocate. The post-migration stressors, relocation stressors, acculturation stressors, strains on relationships, oppression, loss of social supports, stress relating to having high expectations of their move, loss of connectedness and feelings of being misunderstood, lack of harmony and balance, cultural conflict between the dominant culture in America and the culture of their home country, and financial problems, which can lead to marital conflict. When treating the children and adolescents seeking counseling or psychological services will be often be first identified within the school system and are often first identified for academic concerns. Sometimes the student will feel overwhelmed due to language differences, pacing of the academic learning environment, individualistic structures of the classroom, different teacher-student relationships, unawareness of how to ask for help or who to ask for help, confusing cultural foundations of the school, and academic difficulties can also contribute to emotional issues and conflicts within the family over performance. Children and adolescents from recent European immigrant families may also be referred for social issues. The children and adolescents may feel a sense of isolation and lack of connectedness caused by feeling different from other children, which can affect self-esteem and leading to feelings of shame and guilt. Adolescent immigrants may have to deal with negative stereotypes other students hold, and they may be particularly prone to self-esteem issues. The cultural, political, and economic geographic experiences of migrants are different, although some unifying elements exist as well, such as the search for protection from trauma, oppression, and isolation, the search for better standards of living and experiencing a new lifestyle, focus on survival, a sense of belonging is replaced with isolation, a sense of harmony is replaced with disruption, a sense of mastery is replaced with being devalued, and the sense of independence is replaced with dependence. Without understanding and healing immigrants can become discouraged and might exclude, devaluate, and reject themselves and others. The experience of shame and disconnect may lead to unhealthy patterns of behavior and self-medication through alcohol and substance abuse. So counselors can help these families by rebuilding a sense of identity and self-efficacy through sharing their story. The narrative approach to counseling is particularly helpful with European immigrants. There are 3 core phases of the narrative counseling, which include deconstructing the dominant cultural narrative, internalizing of the problem, and reauthoring of the story. The creative arts can also help European immigrant clients find meaning of identifying sources of disconnect and frustration, and the counselor who can provide safe environments for immigrant clients to describe and partake in cultural traditions and practices that are meaningful and relevant to them can help the families begin to reground themselves and begin the healing. Counselors should also explore with clients several elements that influence cultural identity and wellness, primary social networks, cultural dimensions, Native cultural contacts, immigration history, language dimensions, psychocultural dimensions, and other sources of stressors. With social justicing, counselors should identify 4 guiding principles of equity, access, participation, and harmony. Equity pertains to the involvement of the cultural-centered approach. Access pertains to the counselor's choice to clarify, identify, and construct identity construction and self and clients. Participation is the underscores the importance of mutuality and authenticity, and harmony pertains to the search for all wellness by tapping into the cultural wisdom and deconstructing the process of devaluing that immigrants may be experiencing. So that covers chapters 13 and 14 for week 6. Thank you so much, and I will see you soon.